The storm hammered against Aiden's cabin with relentless fury, rain lashing the windows like desperate fingers clawing for entry. He'd chosen this remote corner of the frontier colony precisely for its isolation, miles from the nearest settlement, surrounded by dense forest that kept the rest of humanity comfortably distant. But tonight, through the howling wind, he heard something that made his former medic instincts flare to life, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. It was weak, almost human, a whimper of pain that cut through the thunder. Aiden grabbed his jacket and flashlight, cursing himself even as you stepped into the deluge. The rain was ice cold, immediately soaking through his clothes as he followed the sound around the side of his cabin. His flashlight beam caught her, a figure crumpled against the wooden wall, shivering violently, her skin an otherworldly deep purple that seemed to absorb the light. Blonde hair, darkened by rain, clung to her face and neck. She was barely conscious, her lips tinged blue, hypothermia clearly setting in. Aiden didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit them both as he kicked the door shut behind him. She was trembling so hard he could feel it through his own soaked clothes. "Stay with me," he murmured, laying her on the couch near the fireplace. His training took over. Assess, stabilize, treat. Her breathing was shallow, her alien physiology similar enough to human that he recognized the danger signs. The soaked clothes had to come off, or she'd go into shock. Aiden worked quickly, clinically, peeling away the tattered, sodden garments that clung to her purple skin. He kept his touch professional, his mind focused on survival protocols rather than the obvious beauty of her exotic features. He grabbed thick blankets from his bedroom, intending to wrap her completely and get her core temperature up. As he gently turned her to drape the blanket around her shoulders, he froze mid-motion. Across her back, spanning from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, were intricate geometric markings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, a soft, ethereal glow that cut through the dimness of the cabin. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen these symbols before, years ago, in classified military archives he'd accessed during his service. Star maps, ancient gateway coordinates, the markings of the starborn, a lineage so rare they were considered virtually extinct, hunted across the galaxy for the genetic key they carried. The ability to activate the ancient jump gates that predated every known civilization, gates that could reshape trade routes, military strategy, the entire balance of galactic power. His hands trembled slightly as he completed wrapping the blanket around her, his mind racing. This wasn't just some refugee fleeing persecution. This girl, sleeping fitfully on his couch, was living proof of something governments would kill to possess. And somehow, impossibly, she'd ended up collapsed outside his door in the middle of a storm on a backwater colony world. Aiden sank into the chair across from her, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way the firelight played across her purple skin and blonde hair. His quiet life had just ended. He knew it with absolute certainty. The moment he'd carried her across his threshold, everything had changed. Lyray's silver eyes snapped open with a gasp, her body jolting upright as consciousness returned in a panicked rush. The unfamiliar surroundings crashed into her awareness. Wooden walls, crackling fire, the scent of something cooking. She scrambled backward on the couch, the blanket falling away, her breath coming in rapid, frightened bursts. Her gaze locked onto the human male sitting across from her, and she pressed herself against the arm of the couch, trapped between him and the corner. "Please," she whispered, in fragmented galactic common, her accent thick and musical. "Please don't send me back. They'll kill me." Her hands instinctively moved to her back, as if trying to hide what Aiden had already seen. Aiden raised both hands slowly, palms out, making himself as non-threatening as possible. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. "You were dying in the storm. I brought you inside, that's all." He gestured to the small table beside him, where he'd set out water, bread, and a bowl of warm soup. "You need to eat something. You're safe here." Lyray's eyes darted between Aiden and the food, her body tense as a coiled spring. The logical part of her brain recognized that if he'd wanted to harm her or turn her in, he would have done so already. She was completely vulnerable, had been unconscious in his home. But trust was a luxury she'd learned to abandon months ago when the hunters had found her family's hiding place. Still, her stomach twisted with hunger, and the warmth of the cabin was seeping into her bones in a way that felt almost painful after so long in the cold. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the water. Aiden didn't move, didn't make any sudden gestures. She drank deeply, then took the soup, her hands shaking slightly. "Why?" she finally asked, her calm improving as her mind cleared. "Why did you save me? You saw my back. You know what I am." Aiden leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes steady on hers. "I saw a person freezing to death in the storm. Everything else is secondary to that." Something in Lyray's chest loosened at his words, a knot of fear she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She set down the empty bowl and pulled the blanket tighter around her, suddenly aware that she was wearing only his oversized shirt. "They're hunting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The consortium, the mercenary guilds, even some of the supposedly peaceful governments. My people, we could activate the old gates, the gateway network that predates every modern civilization. Whoever controls us controls transportation across half the known galaxy." Her silver eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "They killed my family, my entire community. I've been running for 8 months. I didn't think there was anywhere left to hide." Aiden noticed the angry cuts on her forearms, partially healed, but clearly from recent violence. Without asking, he stood and retrieved his medkit, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "Let me look at those," he said, kneeling beside the couch. Lyrae flinched when his fingers first touched her purple skin, but his hands were gentle, clinical, cleaning and bandaging the wounds with practiced efficiency. His touch was the first kind contact she'd experienced since her world had shattered, and despite herself, she felt her body beginning to relax. "I was a medic," Aiden explained as he worked, "before I came here looking for peace and quiet. Looks like the universe has other plans." He finished wrapping her arm and sat back on his heels, meeting her gaze. "I don't know what happens next, but I know this. Nobody is taking you from here against your will. Not while I'm breathing." Lyrae stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the ulterior motive everyone else had carried. She found only quiet determination, and something else, something that looked almost like loneliness recognizing itself in another. "Why would you risk that? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Aiden stood up, moving back to his chair to give her space. "Maybe that's exactly why," he said. "Because I don't owe you anything. Because this isn't about debt or obligation or what I can get from you. It's just the right thing to do." For the first time in 8 months, Lyrae felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. She pulled the blanket closer and allowed herself to believe just for a moment that maybe she'd finally found sanctuary. 3 days passed in Aiden's cabin, and Lyrae began to understand what safety felt like again. He gave her his bedroom while he took the couch, never pressing her for more information than she was ready to share, never making her feel like a burden despite the danger she'd brought to his doorstep. He watched him move through his daily routines, chopping wood, preparing meals, checking the perimeter of his property, and found herself studying the way his human features looked in different light. There was a quiet strength to him, a calm competence that settled something anxious in her chest. On the 3rd evening, she found him sitting on the porch, despite the cold, staring out at the darkening forest. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his blanket, which still smelled of him, and stepped outside. "May I join you?" she asked softly. Aiden glanced up, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "Of course. It's beautiful out here at dusk." Lyrae sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and together they watched the first stars emerge. "I need to tell you the truth," Lyrae said, after a long silence, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "About what I am, what it means." Aiden turned to look at her, his full attention focused on her face. "The Starborn aren't just rare because we were hunted. We're rare because we're not supposed to exist anymore.
We're a remnant of the ancient civilization that built the gateway network, genetically engineered to interface with technology so old that modern science can't even properly scan it. My people lived in secret for thousands of years, passing down the knowledge of what we could do. But someone always finds out. Always. Her voice cracked slightly, and she felt Aiden's hand cover hers, warm and solid. 6 months ago, they found my community. We scattered. I don't know if anyone else survived. And the worst part is that I can't even use what makes me special. I don't know how. The knowledge was supposed to be taught gradually, over years. I was only beginning my training when... She couldn't finish the sentence. Aiden's hand traced slow circles on the back of her hand, a gesture of comfort that sent unexpected warmth through her entire body. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said quietly.
The next 2 weeks transformed both of them in ways neither had anticipated. Aiden converted his storage shed into a secure space where Lorraine could practice, trying to understand the abilities coded into her very DNA. The first time she managed to activate one of his old navigation devices, a piece of pre-gateway technology he'd kept as a curiosity, the shed filled with holographic light, ancient star maps blooming in the air around them. Lorraine stood at the center of the display, her back markings blazing with brilliant luminescence, her blonde hair lifting slightly as if moved by an invisible current. Aiden watched from the doorway, struck breathless not just by the display of power, but by the look of pure joy on her face. The first time he'd seen her smile without shadows behind it. When the display faded and she collapsed from exhaustion, he caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. "I did it!" she gasped, her silver eyes bright with excitement and fatigue. "I actually made it work!" Aiden brushed sweat-dampened blonde hair from her purple forehead, his touch lingering longer than strictly necessary. "You were amazing," he said softly, and the way she looked up at him in that moment made his heart stutter in his chest. The boundaries between them had been slowly eroding, careful touches becoming more frequent, lingering glances carrying weight neither of them quite acknowledged aloud. Lorraine found herself drawn to Aiden's quiet strength, the way he never asked for anything from her except honesty, the way his presence made her feel safe enough to sleep through the night without nightmares. And Aiden, who'd convinced himself he preferred solitude, discovered that her laughter filled spaces in him he hadn't realized were empty. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen, their dance around each other became impossible to ignore. Lorraine reached for a knife at the same moment Aiden did, and their hands collided. Instead of pulling away, she turned her palm up, threading her fingers through his. "Aiden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to know something. What we are to each other, is it just protection? Just gratitude?" Aiden's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone, marveling at the softness of her purple skin. "If it was just protection," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I wouldn't lie awake at night listening to make sure you're breathing. I wouldn't memorize the way you look when sunlight hits your hair." Lorraine's breath hitched, her bioluminescent markings beginning to glow softly beneath her shirt, a physiological response to emotional intensity she couldn't control. "My people," she began, needing him to understand, "when we form bonds, it's deeper than humans typically experience. Our emotions are tied to our biology, to the ancient technology in our genes. If I let myself care for you the way I'm beginning to..." She trailed off, uncertain how to explain the intensity of what she felt building inside her. Aiden stepped closer, eliminating the last small distance between them, his hand still cradling her face. "I spent 2 years trying not to feel anything at all," he said, "trying to be numb. But you walked into my life dying in a storm, and suddenly I feel everything. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of whatever this is between us." Lorraine made a small sob, something between a sob and a laugh, and then she was pressing herself against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face buried against his neck. Aiden held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the way her markings pulsed with soft light even through the fabric of her clothes. "Show me," Aiden whispered against her hair. "Your markings, not because of what they can do, but because they're part of you." Lorraine pulled back slightly, uncertainty flickering across her features. The markings were sacred, intimate, something her people rarely revealed outside of family or chosen mates. But as she looked into Aiden's eyes and saw only genuine desire to know her completely, she felt the last of her walls crumbling. Slowly, her hands trembling slightly, she turned her back to Aiden and lifted her shirt. The geometric patterns blazed to life, responding to her emotional state, covering her back in intricate, glowing lines that seemed to shift and flow like liquid light. Aiden's sharp intake of breath made her shiver. His fingers hovered just above her skin, not quite touching. "May I?" he asked, his voice reverent. When she nodded, he traced one of the lines with a feather-light touch, following its path from her shoulder blade down to the small of her back. Lorraine gasped at the sensation. The markings were incredibly sensitive, each touch sending cascades of sensation through her entire body. "Beautiful," Aiden murmured. "You're absolutely beautiful." Lorraine turned back to face him, letting her shirt fall back into place, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something deeper, more primal. "If this continues," her voice husky, "there's no going back for me. Starborn bond deeply, permanently." Aiden's answer was to pull her close and press his lips to hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded with fierce intensity, her purple fingers tangling in his hair. The galaxy could wait. The danger could wait. For this moment, there was only the two of them, finally acknowledging what had been building since that storm-swept night, something that felt inevitable and right and utterly worth fighting for. The alarm system Aiden had rigged around his property screamed to life at 3 in the morning, shattering the peace they'd built over the past month. Lorraine jolted awake in Aiden's arms. They'd stopped pretending to need separate sleeping spaces 2 weeks ago, her eyes wide with instant terror. "They found me," she whispered, her markings flaring bright with distress. Aiden was already moving, pulling on clothes, grabbing the weapons he'd hoped never to use again. "The safe room," he said urgently. "Now, like we planned." But Lorraine shook her head, her jaw set with sudden determination. "No more running. No more hiding. I'm tired of being prey, Aiden. I'm tired of letting them dictate my life." Through the window, they could see lights in the forest, at least 5 craft landing, mercenary teams moving with military precision. Aiden's combat instincts, dormant for years, roared back to life. "There are too many," he argued, even as he checked his weapons. But Lorraine's hand on his arm stopped him. "I've been practicing every day. I can do more than just activate old navigation tools now." What happened in the next 30 minutes would later be whispered about in mercenary bars across 3 sectors as the night the Starborn proved why ancient civilizations had created them in the first place. When the first team breached the cabin, they found Lorraine standing in the center of the main room, her back exposed, her markings blazing with such intensity that the light was almost blinding. She'd connected somehow to the old-world technology buried deep in the planet's crust, gateway remnants that predated the colony by millennia. The cabin became the center of a localized field that disrupted every piece of modern technology the mercenaries carried. Weapons failed, communication died, even their cybernetic enhancements went offline. Aiden watched in awe as the woman he loved became something transcendent, her power finally unleashed, not in a laboratory or for someone else's purpose, but in defense of the home and the love she'd chosen for herself. When the field faded, the mercenaries fled in disarray, their equipment ruined, their confidence shattered. The consortium ship in orbit received a clear message: this Starborn is protected, and attempting to take her would cost more than any government or organization was willing to pay. In the aftermath, as dawn broke over the forest and the last of the intruders disappeared over the horizon, Lorraine collapsed into Aiden's waiting arms. Her markings still glowed softly, gradually fading as her exhaustion overtook her. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aiden carried her back inside the damaged cabin, laying her gently on their bed. "It's for now," he said honestly. "They'll think twice about coming back, but we'll need to be careful. Maybe reach out to some allies I still have from my military days.
People who believe in protecting rather than exploiting. Lorraine's hand found his, squeezing weakly. I don't want to leave here. This is the first place that's felt like home. You're the first person who's felt like... She trailed off, but her eyes said what her voice couldn't. Aiden leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, then her lips. You're not going anywhere unless you choose to, he promised. We'll figure this out together. Find a way for you to live freely, not in hiding, but not as a target either. Over the following days, as they repaired the cabin and reinforced their defenses, something crystallized between them. The crisis had burned away the last hesitations, the final doubts. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their rebuilt porch, Lorraine turned to Aiden with luminous eyes. Among my people, she said softly, we have a bonding ceremony. It's rare, sacred. It means choosing someone as your partner in every sense. Sharing life, sharing power, sharing future. I know humans have similar concepts, but ours is permanent, biological. Our markings link to our chosen mate. If I let myself care for you the way I'm beginning to, she trailed off, uncertain how to explain the intensity of what she felt building inside her. Aiden stepped closer, eliminating the last small distance between them, his hand still cradling her face. I spent 2 years trying not to feel anything at all, he said, trying to be numb. But you walked into my life dying in a storm, and suddenly I feel everything. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of whatever this is between us. Lorraine made a small sob, something between a sob and a laugh, and then she was pressing herself against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face buried against his neck. Aiden held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the way her